On the crisp winter morning of January 22, 2026, the snow-dusted town of Davos, Switzerland, welcomed a gathering of world leaders, diplomats, and financiers at the annual World Economic Forum. Amid the global chatter on economics, climate, and technology, a singular announcement cut through the usual discourse. Former President Donald J. Trump was set to unveil a bold new initiative, a global conflict resolution body he dubbed the Board of Peace. The stage was set for a high-stakes display of diplomacy, ambition, and controversy. The Board of Peace, according to Trump's announcement, was conceived as a forum to address international conflicts swiftly and decisively, while the charter was yet to be fully disclosed. Preliminary reports indicated that the board would focus initially on the enduring crisis in Gaza, extending later to other global flashpoints. Trump framed the initiative as a mechanism for rapid mediation, suggesting that traditional multilateral institutions, while respected, had often been slow, bureaucratic, or ineffective. Yet the plan was immediately polarizing. Critics warned that the board could rival the United Nations in influence, bypassing established norms of diplomacy and global governance. Major Western allies expressed caution. The United Kingdom, citing concerns about Russia's involvement, declined to sign on. France and Sweden, among others, signaled their hesitation. Yet Trump's team emphasized that the board was open to all nations willing to commit to peace and financial support, with reports of an initial $1 billion membership contribution sparking debate over the commercial and political undertones of the endeavor. The Davos announcement itself was orchestrated for maximum visibility. In a grand auditorium, Trump presented the initiative before a cadre of journalists and international delegates. Large screens displayed the emblem of the Board of Peace, a globe encircled by olive branches, symbolizing the ambitious scope of the project. Trump, speaking with characteristic confidence, emphasized that the board's objective was to achieve tangible peace outcomes where existing institutions have struggled. Observers quickly noted the symbolism. The presence of leaders from Russia, Israel, Hungary, and select other nations at the launch event signaled the complexity of the undertaking. These nations, some with strained relations with the West, were portrayed by Trump as potential pillars of a new diplomatic framework. Yet, the absence of several European powers hinted at the political balancing act inherent in such an initiative. The geopolitical implications were immediate. Analysts observed that a US-led initiative with strong involvement from nations like Russia could redraw power structures in international conflict resolution. Could the board act as a credible alternative to the UN? Or would it merely replicate existing mechanisms under a different banner? And how would the United States, and indeed the global community, navigate a structure with mixed allegiances and untested authority? Trump's timing at Davos was also deliberate. The annual forum has long been a stage for political theater as much as policy discussion. By choosing this platform, Trump not only elevated the visibility of the Board of Peace but also positioned himself as a central figure in global diplomacy once again. This calculated move underscored a broader strategy, leveraging international platforms to influence public perception and shape policy narratives. Inside the boardroom and beyond, discussions were already underway regarding membership and influence. Reports suggested that approximately 35 nations had expressed tentative interest in the board's charter. The composition of the board, the rules of decision-making, and the scope of authority remained fluid. Trump's team emphasized inclusivity and pragmatism, framing participation as both a commitment to peace and a shared investment in global stability. Critics, however, highlighted the financial thresholds and political leverage inherent in the model, questioning whether the initiative prioritized influence over impartiality. The broader international community watched cautiously, while some nations appreciated the attempt at a new diplomatic forum. Others feared that the board could unintentionally legitimize actors with contentious global records. Russia's involvement, in particular, elicited skepticism, with several analysts warning that the board's success hinged on balancing competing interests without undermining existing security arrangements or international law. Beyond politics, the Board of Peace represented a narrative of personal branding. Trump's persona as a dealmaker, a figure who thrives on attention and negotiation, was intertwined with the initiative. The board became, in effect, both a diplomatic project and a symbol of influence. In Davos, amidst the backdrop of the Alps and the chatter of global elites, the launch was as much about optics as it was about policy. Financially, the board's projected funding model also attracted scrutiny. With membership fees and potential donor contributions, the initiative was structured as a mix of diplomatic commitment and economic stakeholding. Critics feared that this could blur the line between genuine peacebuilding and transactional geopolitics. Proponents, conversely, argued that such a model ensured accountability, incentivizing nations to actively participate rather than merely offer symbolic support. Even as Trump outlined the vision, questions remained. How would the board operate on the ground in conflict zones? What enforcement mechanisms, if any, would it possess? And how would it coordinate with, or perhaps challenge, existing international institutions like the United Nations, NATO, or the European Union? These questions underscored the uncertainty surrounding a newly minted initiative, particularly one emerging from a context as politically charged as Davos. The announcement also sparked conversations about soft power and diplomacy in the 21st century. While traditional diplomacy relies on incremental negotiations and long-established channels, the Board of Peace was framed as a bold, proactive tool, an idea that resonated with certain nations seeking faster resolutions to protracted conflicts. Whether this approach would yield tangible results or provoke resistance remained to be seen. In conclusion, the unveiling of the Board of Peace at Davos represented more than just a policy initiative. It was a statement of ambition, a strategic maneuver in the complex landscape of global politics, and a reflection of the evolving methods by which influence and diplomacy are projected in the modern era. Trump's gamble-balancing vision, optics, and geopolitics set the stage for international debate, skepticism, and cautious optimism. The world was left contemplating the potential impact of this new body. Could a single initiative, launched amid media glare and political tension, reshape the future of conflict resolution? Or would it join the long list of ambitious ideas struggling to translate vision into action? The answer, the world hoped, would unfold in the coming months, beginning with the next critical chapter at Davos, the meeting between Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr. As the Board of Peace captured global attention in Davos, another diplomatic narrative was quietly unfolding. The anticipated meeting between former U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for Ukraine. Still grappling with the devastating effects of a prolonged war with Russia, the engagement held symbolic and strategic significance. For Trump, it represented an opportunity to position himself as a central architect of conflict resolution, extending his Board of Peace initiative from theory to tangible international impact. President Zelensky arrived in Davos amid tight security, his presence underscoring both the risks and urgency of peace talks. The Ukrainian delegation, composed of senior ministers, security advisors, and foreign diplomats, was tasked with addressing immediate concerns, ceasefire guarantees, reconstruction funding, and assurances of sovereignty. Zelensky's participation also highlighted a broader political balancing act, ensuring Ukraine's interests were represented without appearing to compromise international alliances or concede leverage in negotiations with Russia. Trump welcomed Zelensky with characteristic pageantry, framing the meeting as a step toward historic peace agreements. In remarks delivered on the sidelines of the forum, Trump emphasized the urgency of dialogue and the need for decisive action. He suggested that both Ukraine and Russia were reasonably close to a deal, urging leaders to finalize arrangements that could stabilize the region. While observers noted the optimism in his tone, analysts cautioned that diplomatic realities remained complex, with unresolved issues ranging from territorial disputes to security guarantees. Central to the discussions was the role of Russia and its leadership. While Russia had expressed tentative support for the Board of Peace, skepticism persisted among Western allies. Some feared that participation in Trump's initiative could legitimize Moscow's position without addressing core grievances. The Ukrainian delegation, mindful of these concerns, sought to ensure that any agreement facilitated through the board would respect international law and Ukraine's territorial integrity. Behind the scenes, Trump's team engaged in parallel negotiations, with envoys like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner reportedly preparing to travel to Moscow to discuss broader terms with President Vladimir Putin. These efforts highlighted the multi-layered strategy underpinning Trump's approach, leveraging high-profile meetings in Davos to signal progress while conducting detailed, sensitive diplomacy through specialized channels. Financial and reconstruction considerations were also on the table. Ukraine faces a monumental task in rebuilding infrastructure damaged by years of conflict, restoring energy grids, and revitalizing urban centers. The Board of Peace, while initially framed as a diplomatic mechanism, was positioned as a potential conduit for funding and investment, offering the promise of financial support in exchange for a commitment to negotiated settlements. This dual role as both mediator and facilitator of reconstruction added complexity to the talks. blending traditional diplomacy with economic strategy. The human dimension of the conflict was ever present. Delegates in Davos, journalists on the ground, and global observers were reminded of the millions affected by the war, civilians displaced, cities scarred by bombardment, and families striving to survive amid uncertainty. Zelensky's presence underscored the urgency of translating high-level negotiations into practical outcomes that could alleviate human suffering. Trump, aware of the optics, emphasized humanitarian priorities alongside political objectives, seeking to frame the meeting as a genuine effort to save lives and restore stability. Analysts debated the potential outcomes of the Trump-Zelensky engagement. One scenario envisioned a preliminary framework agreement, facilitated by the Board of Peace, establishing ceasefire terms, monitoring mechanisms, and a roadmap for reconstruction. Another, more cautious scenario considered the possibility of incremental progress, with negotiations requiring months of follow-up, contingent on trust building and verification of compliance from both parties. The challenge lay not only in bridging political gaps, but also in ensuring that any agreement had durability beyond media coverage or political gestures. The meeting also carried broader geopolitical symbolism. For the United States, even in a non-presidential capacity, Trump's involvement highlighted the continuing influence of American leadership in global affairs. For Ukraine, engagement with Trump and the Board of Peace was a calculated effort to diversify diplomatic channels and garner international attention for its plight. For Russia, participation presented both an opportunity and a risk, gaining a voice in a potentially influential forum while facing scrutiny over compliance and intentions. Security considerations loomed large. Davos, while a hub of diplomacy, was not immune to the risks associated with high-profile international negotiations. Tight protocols, controlled access, and coordinated intelligence operations ensured that leaders could engage with a measure of safety, yet the stakes remained elevated. Any misstep, leak, or security breach could have repercussions far beyond the forum's confines, affecting negotiations and shaping public perception. Beyond the immediate talks, the Trump-Zelensky meeting illuminated the evolving nature of modern diplomacy. Unlike traditional negotiations confined to embassies or back rooms, this engagement unfolded in a highly visible, media-saturated environment. Every handshake, statement, and photo opportunity carried weight, shaping narratives and influencing public opinion. The Board of Peace, in this context, served as both a platform for policy discussion and a stage for strategic communication. Observers also noted the challenge of managing expectations. While Trump projected confidence and urgency, Zelensky had to navigate domestic pressures, international scrutiny, and the realities of ongoing conflict. Any premature announcement of progress could risk political backlash or undermine the credibility of both leaders. This delicate balance underscored the intricate choreography required in high-stakes diplomacy, where perception often carries as much significance as substance. As the discussions progressed, attention turned to the mechanisms for implementing potential agreements. How would ceasefire monitoring be enforced? What role would international observers play? Could reconstruction funding be secured without undermining oversight or accountability? These operational questions highlighted the gap between conceptual agreements and practical execution, a challenge familiar to diplomats and conflict resolution experts worldwide. At the close of the meeting, both leaders expressed cautious optimism. Trump reiterated his commitment to using the Board of Peace as a vehicle for resolution, while Zelensky emphasized the need for sustained dialogue, verification, and international support. The press coverage captured the blend of symbolism and substance, framing the engagement as a critical step in a complex and evolving diplomatic process. The broader implications for global security and order were profound. Success could signal a new model for conflict resolution, rapid, high-profile, and mediated through alternative forums like the Board of Peace. Failure, conversely, could reinforce skepticism toward personalized diplomacy and highlight the limitations of initiatives operating outside established multilateral frameworks. The Davos meeting between Trump and Zelensky left the world watching. In the coming weeks, the unfolding negotiations, follow-up visits to Moscow, and potential agreements would test the effectiveness of the Board of Peace, the resilience of Ukrainian diplomacy, and the capacity of high-profile mediators to influence outcomes in an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. The story of January 22, 2026 is thus twofold: a bold new initiative, the Board of Peace, attempting to reshape global diplomacy, and a high-stakes engagement, the Trump-Zelensky meeting, seeking tangible solutions to one of the world's most pressing conflicts. Both narratives intertwine, revealing the interplay between ambition, strategy, and human consequence in modern international relations. Reminder that peace, while aspirational, demands both vision and meticulous execution. In the snowy corridors of Davos, the world watched as politics, diplomacy, and media converged. The outcomes remained uncertain, but the stakes were unmistakably high. The Board of Peace and the Trump-Zelensky engagement together marked a pivotal moment in contemporary diplomacy, offering the promise of resolution while exposing the fragile complexity of international negotiation.